Hei, alle sammen. Velkommen, alle sammen. So, thank you, Christine, for being here as well. We have a Norwegian in the room. How many of you already can converse in Norwegian, other than Christine? Okay. So, hvorfor lære seg norsk? Why learn Norwegian? I'm going to make this a bit interactive from the early part of the presentation. So please raise your hand if you are really intent at this moment, very motivated already to learn Norwegian. Okay, so we have 5 hands up. Why are you learning Norwegian or so motivated to learn Norwegian? Love of the Nordic countries, so everywhere from Finland over to Iceland. And even Estonia. Estonia as well, I was about to mention that, but you brought it in already. And how about for you?
Similar reasons. They wanted to Norway, and I want to make sure that some Norwegian people there, and I know German, so I thought it would be easier.
Okay, so the point is, just in Norway, already knowing German is a big help, already knowing English is a big help, and German an extra big help. And so, how about for you?
I discovered I have Norwegian ancestors. I'm German.
The answer, so I can give the microphone.
Yes, but this microphone, we don't have a cordless one, do we?
Yeah, we have only one.
Okay.
So just
Okay, remember it makes squeaky noise.
Okay, you can repeat it.
I've been hoping that would, yeah. Okay, because we don't have a cordless microphone, I've been repeating the question to some degree so everybody could understand. So you have Norwegian ancestry.
I would like to research about the history of families of Norway.
And understanding the background. Okay, so that's 3 different reasons, two overlapping on just a general interest and one actually a family background. And others who are interested in learning Norwegian, who are highly motivated already, yes? So do you can prate norsk already? Yeah. Okay. So we have one who's already studying Norwegian and can speak Norwegian already. Anybody else highly motivated who wants to share your reason for wanting to learn Norwegian?
I've got Norwegian friends for a long time now, and so I started to learn the language, but now I've got contents there, and so I'm better with them and so I'm reading in English, and I'm also curious of like different dialects.
That's wonderful. So you already have Norwegian friends and you just want to carry the conversation so you learn more about them by having their understanding of their own language and also the dialects, as you mentioned, which is a good point, and I'll get into that as well in this presentation. For those of you who speak Norwegian already, you know there are the 5 main vowels, A, E, I, O, Y, and then you have these here. So you have 3 letters that don't exist in many alphabets. And then you have a special way of the Y. It's used as a vowel and has a special pronunciation. And for those of you who speak Norwegian already, you might laugh at the way I pronounce this in my attempts to say O, and Y. So that's my own interpretation. I understand our internet's not running. I was supposed to try to play a comic video, and you would have seen one of the entertainers from Norway presenting and singing. You know that song, It's Not My Name, Jane is Not My Name? It's a pop song from a few years ago. He did a version using that melody, and it's called Jeg heter Finn. And so nobody could remember his name, and he was getting fed up about it. So he had the dance and the music video and so on with that. So if you Google in the future, if you're curious, there's a comedian named Ylvis, and you could get, here is his name, you could get many videos from him He's a practical jokester as well. And if you're learning Norwegian or want to learn Norwegian and want Norwegian material, some of this has been subtitled in Norwegian, some of it's been subtitled in English as well. So you might get a little bit of sense of some funny things and improve your Norwegian this way. A little bit of history about the language. So Nynorsk from the year 500 till 700, this was a period before the Vikings. And this was a period where you would have had the runes and all of this, and then you ended up with Norrønt, and then you had the early time of the Vikingstid, when you had the early time of the Viking era, from around 800 to 1050. You had the Gammelnorsk and the Gammelislandsk, and then you ended up with a progression through the time. Now, in the time of the Gammelnorsk, the Old Norse, you had a lot of declension. So if you know Greek or Russian, you have a similar kind of structure with these declensions. And so you would have used a lot of complex declensions. And then this disappeared. It remains in Icelandic, but it disappeared from the continent. So if you're learning Danish or Swedish or Norwegian, no more declensions to worry about. And the interesting thing in these three languages, you don't even have to conjugate the verbs. Each time you have a tense, you simply know what's going on for all of the pronouns. Can you believe it? It's even easier than English, because English has he goes and I go. In Norwegian just has jeg går. Jeg går, I mean, and hun går. That's going on foot, by the way. Because drår is another way to say to go. So jeg drår and hun drår, so I go and she goes. So it's very simple when it comes to grammar. You're going to be finding this one of the easier languages to learn. And Mellomnorsk, so the Middle Norwegian era, here you ended up actually, people were writing in Danish, and Danish people were ruling over the Norwegians. And so the Norwegians in all these villages, you had the religious class and the elite, and they were writing, and most people weren't learning to read or write necessarily. So they were speaking their languages, and then these texts would come and people would be writing in Danish. And then you have the modern Norwegian time around 1525, and you end up later with what I'll explain with Bokmal and Nynorsk. So you have the time in the 1800s where Ivar Aasen was constructing what's known as landsmålet. So this is the like the way of speaking in the land, and you have the standardization of the written language. So if you look at some old signs, where I live in Oslo, and I live close to Bislett-Bad, and if you look at the old pictures from inside, then you'll see it's written in Danish form. And now they've taken away some of those letters and changed the spelling and made it this standard Norwegian spelling. So one day I was at Schiphol Airport, and I had been living in Norway for a few months, studying the language for a couple of years already, and I sat down at the airport, and there happened to be a newspaper next to me. Just by chance I picked it up and started reading it, and I said, this is a strange version of Norwegian. And then I looked at the cover of it, and it actually said it's a paper from Copenhagen. And so it actually, I discovered that I can more or less read Danish, even though I haven't studied it. These two maps will show you some of the breakdown in Norway. So if you go from the north in the yellow, you have Nordnorsk. There are many dialects, of course. I mean, there are probably 15 to 20 ways of saying the word jeg, which would be in Oslo be I. One of them is even close to the Danish. One of them is even close to the Dutch, which is ik. So there are many different, and some of them are A, some of them close to English, I. So it's quite interesting to see many dialects. But as a general rule, just to break it down into 4 zones to oversimplify, you have the Nordnorsk, and in the middle you have Trøndersk, and then on the west you have the Vestlandsk, and then around where Oslo is and that pocket in the southeast you have Østlandsk. And that would mean that when you hear somebody speaking, and you hear their accent, you might be able to not know where exactly they're from in Norway, but you might have a general tendency of knowing. Although you don't know the exact city or village, you might generally say, northern, or these 4 regions. Sometimes when I hear people from Stavanger or farther south, I have the impression that they're speaking something between Norwegian and Danish, for example. It's quite interesting to hear. The joke, how many speak Danish? Anyone speak Danish? The joke about how if you already speak Norwegian, how you start to speak Danish is you take a hot potato in your mouth and you just speak. And then it comes out as Danish. And some people even say that the Danes are the last on the planet when the children are growing up, they're the last ones to actually start speaking because the vowels are so strange to pronounce. And then the other map, it will show, did you know that Norwegian has different official languages? So it has Bokmal, which is what I was explaining as the phenomena of Danish that was imposed, and then the spelling was standardized to represent more of the way that people speak. And Nynorsk is basically a way of saying, okay, Bokmal was imposed as a Danish way of forming the language, but we have all these villages and we really speak this way, so combining the way the different villages speak and creating a standard, and that standard is known as Nynorsk. So if you are in education, you might find, if you're living in Norway, you might find that your system of the main way that your materials are coming to, you might find in the red zone it to be primarily Bokmal, and in the blue zone primarily Nynorsk, and then the middle area is neutral. So I've traveled in Norway to Svalbard, which is off the map way up in the north, and actually a year ago I was at the Polyglot gathering and I was checking in to my flight to Berlin. 2 counters over, I was overhearing the conversation between the gate agent and the person who was trying to travel from Oslo to Spitsbergen, to Longyearbyen, to Svalbard. And what happened is he wasn't able to take his flight. Does anyone know why? He had his ID card with him and he couldn't board the flight. He needed a passport. Although you have Norway as a member of the Schengen zone. Normally you can travel, if you're a European Union citizen, travel with your ID card. Not to Svalbard, you have to have your passport. And it's also a visa-free zone. So if you could manage to take a non-stop flight from, let's say, Mongolia or Russia or Turkmenistan to Longyearbyen, just with your passport, you would be able to stay in that area. So it's got its own tax system and its own regime. It's way up. It's 78 degrees north of the equator, so it's a 4-hour flight north of Oslo. So, and I've also traveled to Trondheim. So if you look at the blue area on the left map, Trondheim, and down to Bergen. I've been to Bergen a couple of times and around Oslo. So I haven't traveled enough around Norway. I have a lot more to see, like the whole yellow zone, for example, and more of the southwest still ahead of me. There are many language schools in Oslo. I happen to have attended the one called Language Power, the 4th on the list. Rosenhof is one that is well reputed and has a connection with the Oslo commune. And then that you might recognize some of the others. I know the owner of the New to Norway program as well. And Language Power is really in the center. It's close to the center with small groups. So I started with that in October of 2013. And it was an intensive A1 toward A2 level. And then since that time, I've been doing some different things to improve my Norwegian. I've been an official resident of Norway for just over 2 years now. And if you see this list, I've used quite a few things on this list to improve my Norwegian. In fact, I've done everything on this list. So I went through the whole NTNU Nettside, that's a website, and the New in Norge, the book which I had from my power school, they have a website, so I did that whole thing as well. And on the end of the website, it happens to have all these dialects, which is a really fun thing, to have the access to all these dialects. So they have a story which goes through in 17 different pronunciations or so. And how many of you have used Routledge already for language ever? You know about that one. It's got a CD and some. It's a basic course really, and I've used the Assimil, and there's still words coming in, so I can still refer back to that. And in Skapago, have you heard of Skapago before? Mysteriet om Niels. So for the B1, B2 book, I was one of the guinea pigs. So he wanted to have foreigners who were learning Norwegian to take all the exercises and give feedback for quality control. And A1 to A2 is written in several languages, so you could choose a primary language and use that primary language to learn Norwegian, whereas B1, B2 is completely in Norwegian, so all the definitions are using the A1, A2 vocabulary and description for you to improve your Norwegian at the B1, B2 level. I've done some Itaki courses. I use Long 8 still. I created Yotzi as a platform, so I write in Norwegian and I try to get it corrected. 500 words or more articles, I try to get it corrected by others. It's fairly new, so it takes some time to gain the critical mass. I've used Norwegian 101 as the premium, and I had the app in the phone, and I could write to the teacher quick texts, and the teacher would correct. They'd take 2 days off, and the other 5 days a week they'd correct within 24 hours. And I use High Native still today. It's a great way to just say, is this correct, or how would you say this in Norwegian? I'm reading the newspaper and I come across something, I have no idea what it is, and it might not, Google Translate's useless, so I go ahead and type, and then somebody responds. What I forgot to put on here is one called Read Long. Have you ever heard of Read Long? I'll put an article in Chrome browser, and I'm a subscriber of Read Long. It'll go in Chrome browser in Norwegian, and then I can use Google Translate settings. So oftentimes that's good enough to build up the vocabulary to continue improving my Norwegian. I've used the Duolingo. I've used these last 3 books are a series with cassettes, På vei, and then Stein på stein, and then finally Her på berget. These are the dialects I wanted to share with you, but unfortunately the internet is not connecting. And then I had some success stories. It is connecting? Let's go for it. Yeah? Okay, let's see what happens. Thanks for letting me know. In fact, that means we can even go back to that video. Have you heard of this newspaper before? It means exclamation point. And it was founded by a man from Peru, Alfredo Biamont. So you see next to in the masthead, you see next to utrop, which again means exclamation point. It says Millet Norsk sider, So this is a newspaper for immigrants to Norway to learn to get more and more Norwegian without being too overwhelmed by the regular press in the regular degree of Norwegian. And so it's written in easier to understand Norwegian than the regular like Aftenposten or VG or Dagens Næringsliv. And so I have a few success stories on this slide. Of people who moved to Norway, and because they became very good in Norwegian, they were able to carve out a nice career in Norway. And this woman here, Andrea Gergelova, is from Slovakia, and it's talking about her time in Norway, 7 years in Norway, and her success as a manager in Sunnmøre. Do you know where is Sunnmøre? In the west, okay. How many Slovaks do we have in the room? Just curious. No? Okay. So you can see the article saying you have to take responsibility, mål ansvar, and you have to have a priority when you're coming from another country in order to make the best and to get the highest level possible in the language so that you're able to integrate the most and get better work, because that's one of the areas for feeling the most comfortable if you move to another country. Let's see. And what we'll do is I'll use the board a little bit. I'll take some questions. I still had one more success story, but I'm having problems opening the slide at the moment. And then, let's see. Should just open with PowerPoint view. So this is a story of one who immigrated from Sri Lanka to Norway, and he was illiterate at the time, and he learned to read and write and was able to become fluent at a high level in Norwegian. So, and it talks about some of the methods that he used in this part here, and the people who come from outside of the European Union, they get 500 hours of Norwegian school included. They also get the Norwegian society classes included. So it's actually not just outside European Union, it's outside the European Economic Area and the developed countries. It's more of the people who come from developing countries who have access to that free of charge. So he was there at a young age participating in the program, and then continued. Once you finish that program, it takes a lot of initiative to keep going as well. It's never enough, really. You can always continue and learn more, and it's about consistency and motivation as well. So, yeah, okay. So I'm going to take some questions, and then I'm going to use the whiteboard and do a little bit as well with the language. So, question?
Actually, not a question, but another suggestion for a learning resource that wasn't included is Learn Norwegian Naturally. It's a YouTube series where the young man uses like creates transcriptions of like news stories.
So learn Norwegian naturally. I didn't know that. I'm going to write that down as well. Learn Norwegian Naturally is another resource. And it's a YouTube channel.
Yeah, it's a YouTube channel and he has a website. The best part about it is it's a good way to get listening comprehension, because that tends to be one of the more
And that is definitely, Norwegian listening comprehension is one of the more difficult parts, especially if you have people from other dialects. So once again, it's called Learn Norwegian Naturally. Thanks for sharing that. Any questions? Comments? I can think of 3 examples to answer your question. One example, the question was if the Norwegian language has specific things that you find because it's so far north that you find that enters into the language, enters into the mentality. And yes, I can think of 3. I'm sure there are more than the 3 that I have in mind right now. One is this word mørketid. Mørketid. How many of you have never heard of mørketid? Raise your hand. If you've never heard of it, those of you who have your hands up. Okay, so what is mørk? Can you think about mørk? Mørk might be, it's English, what's murky? You know the word murky, right? So it's maybe dark, right? And tid, what would that be? Time, yeah, mørketid. So what do you think this would be? Yeah, so if you're in Svalbard, you have 4 months of the year where the sun doesn't come up. Once you have the Arctic Circle, you have at least 24 hours where the sun never comes up at the Arctic Circle itself. And as the farther and farther you go from the Arctic Circle up towards Kirkenes, near the Russian border, north of Finland, then they have some weeks going on. If you have a canyon and the sun can't go over that, if you're in a valley, then it could be prolonged as well. If you go to Svalbard, it's 4 months. 4 months the sun doesn't come up. So mørketid lasts for 4 entire months in that case. How about døgnjevil? Døgnjevil? What would the døgnje be? How many have never heard of this word? Okay. So if you have a døgnje, it's that special O with a line, D-O-G-N. So this is, it would be a 24-hour period. Yeah? So døgnjevil is when you don't really know what time of day it is. In the summertime, for example, if you're north of the Arctic Circle, you may have no idea what time of day it is. And so it could be 3 in the morning, could be 2 in the morning, maybe 11 p.m., it doesn't matter. You just act a certain, very energized, for example, because the sun's still up, or you can't sleep because the sun's still up. And then third one is relating to humor, and I'll be doing a presentation also on Sunday in humor in different languages, and I'll use an example of Norwegian humor in the sense of weather, because you get a lot of weather, and you're so far north you get a lot of bad weather, and so you might joke about the weather, and so you might joke that you're lucky that you didn't go up to the mountains on that day of bad weather when you're at the sea, you're at the beach, and you're getting completely drenched in your boat or whatever. So you say, good thing we didn't go to the mountains today with this terrible weather. So you have this kind of sense of humor about the weather. If you want to make a joke in Norwegian, make a joke about the weather. It's probably an easy way to make a connection, to make a bond with Norwegian. Other questions? Yes.
It's true that you don't want to make a friend in Bergen, you ask him if he open rent in Bergen.
Yeah, when I went to Bergen for the second time, the room that I stayed in had fish falling from the sky. It was a painting, it was raining fish. And of course everything was... So the question was, is it true if you want to make a friend in Bergen, you don't talk about how rainy it is there, you don't remind them, right? It's got the reputation to be the rainiest city in Europe. Other questions? Yes?
My understanding is that in countries such as Norway, it's sometimes hard to get people to talk to you in Norwegian instead of, say,
There is definitely a period of time where you're going to be speaking English more until you reach the threshold that the Norwegians will accept that your Norwegian is good enough to deal with you in Norwegian. So it will make it more difficult than learning German in Germany or learning Spanish in Spain or Italian in Italy, because you'll have a greater percentage of the population with such a high level of English. It's kind of similar to the Netherlands in that regard, that you'll need to just go at it. Once you do enough lessons and enough work and reach a conversational enough level, then you'll find it's okay. And the Norwegians will indeed engage with you in their own language. Let's see once again if we have the power for a volume for this 3-minute video as well. Any other questions? Okay, any other questions so far? Yes, up here. Yeah, that's another good question. Nynorsk versus Bokmal. So you probably gather that I've only been studying Bokmal, being based in Oslo. And how is it related to? Old Norwegian. Okay. It's difficult for me to answer that question. Probably not qualified to fully answer. I thought originally it was how it would compare to Bokmal. So since the question is actually how it compares to Gammelnorsk, because I've dabbled in Icelandic a bit, teach yourself Icelandic and a couple of things, and that has a big connection to Old Norse. I can see a couple of ways where the pronoun might be like jeg instead, something like this might be closer, but I'm not got enough information to answer that question. If you're in the West Country, you'll hear a lot of ikke instead of ikke for the negative, and if you go to Iceland, it's ekki. So that's not close, but I can't think of specific examples. Is there anyone here who speaks, who's studied Old Norse and knows whether Nynorsk is more connected than Bokmal to that? Okay. Other questions? Yes, over here. Yes, that's a really fun one to bring up, because when I was studying, first living in Norway, and I was listening to NRK, the radio, all the time, and suddenly I could hear something, and it seemed easier to understand than the other Norwegian broadcasts. And I just was standing and listening, and I felt that it was slower and it was easier, and it turned out to be Swedish. It wasn't Norwegian. So there was a period of time, about 3 or 4 months it lasted, where I could understand Swedish better than Norwegian, even though I was living in Norway studying Norwegian. That's not the case anymore. Now my ability to understand Norwegian broadcasts, especially in standard Bokmal, is better than my ability to understand the Swedish. There are many false friends between Swedish and Norwegian, so you have to be careful. The one I can think of right now is there are two in my head. One is by. By in Norway is a city, and by in Sweden is a village. And lekker in Norway is the play, like the Olympic Games would be the olympiske lekker, or just the verb to play. Might be that, but it's really child's play in Sweden. It wouldn't be this kind of play or game. that you think only in Norway. So that's another difference. And then there are certain base words that are totally different, like poika and flicka. So if you have a boy and a girl in Norway, it would, instead of what I just said, poika and flicka, it would be gutta and jente. So quite different. So there are some basic words that are totally off, but you get used to that because you have enough exposure. The Swedes don't have as much exposure to the Norwegian language, so the Norwegians have tons of exposure to the Swedish language and pick this up, whereas the Swedes might not necessarily pick up the Norwegian. So if you're going to choose one of the three languages, if you don't have any connection, if you don't have family in any three of the three countries, or you're not going to go off and live, and it's just out of an idea to get your foothold into all three, Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish, you should probably start with Norwegian, because then you'll be able to access Danish faster and you'll be able to access Swedish faster.
This is not a question, it's more an attempt or an answer to your previous question. If I understood correctly, the question was, is Nynorsk closer to Old Norse than Bokmal, standard Norwegian? And I have to qualify this because I've done 10 pages of Old Norse. I had to study Nynorsk at school, my native language is standard Norwegian. And I cannot recall that I saw any words in Old Norse that I recognized from Nynorsk that I did not already know in my own language. So logically, I would have imagined that it was closer, but I did not see any examples of it. So, yeah. What I did get out of having those pages of Old Norse was understanding a little bit more of Icelandic, because Old Norse is closer to Icelandic. But the Nynorsk did not help me in any way to understand Old Norse. I don't know if that in any way answered your question.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Thanks, Christine. That's great. Any other questions? Yes.
Again, about the dialects, maybe it's an issue that dialects were, I guess, modern dialects, because there's no mutual interpretation. Take Eldalia, for instance, or Eldalia is a good example in Eldalia compared to the standard Swedish. So my question is, to which extent the dialect in Norwegian can be non-understandable to somebody from Oslo, for instance, is not that much different from standard Norwegian compared to what we found in Swedish.
Okay, so the question is, to what extent all these different dialects throughout the country? Remember, Norway is closer to, Oslo is closer to Rome than it is to Kirkenes, I think, is one of the statistics that we have. And the shortest way to drive from Oslo to Kirkenes is to go via Sweden and Finland, rather than to stay within Norway, to give you another idea. Because the land, the mountains, the fjords, the valleys that divide the country are the reason for all these different dialects and all these differences. So the reason I'm bringing that up is because the landscape of the country is the main reason it separated the people for all these generations and accounted for the dialects. And even till this day, the people are encouraged to keep their dialects alive. And in some countries such as the Netherlands or in France, you're really made fun of to a great extent if you're not switching from your dialect to the standard Dutch or the standard French. Then people might think you're a country bumpkin, unsophisticated, this or that, uneducated. In Norway, that's not the way things are usually viewed. So people get an ear. For people who grow up in Norway, get more of an ear. The foreigners have a very hard time. So for me, I could understand Swedish much easier than trying to understand somebody from a village that I don't know where it is, and I'm encountering a person speaking that dialect for the very first time. The farther away it is from Oslo, the more of a chance that I might not know what's going on. And the less that person has had contact outside of his village, the more likely the dialect's going to be quite strong.
No, it's not a problem for somebody from Oslo.
It can be. I've talked with people from Oslo. Since I didn't grow up there, then I can't say from experience. I'm only repeating what I've heard from, because I was wondering the same thing at one point. I asked some people. And they said it can get to the extreme point that it might be difficult to understand. But usually it's not that bad.
I've native friends in Oslo who tell me that it's easier for them to understand Swedish still than certain dialects. And then some of my other friends have mentioned that as children, they actually took, in their classes, they had to practice understanding some of the dialects, especially from the north, as a result of kind of that understanding barriers. They can understand them now, but only because of formal training.
You understood that it was formal training, thanks to formal training for people from Oslo to get their ear so they could finally start to understand some of the more distant dialects.
I'd like to comment on that as well, because you made a comparison with the Swedish dialect Ekdalistan, and that is for all practical purposes a different language. And we don't have any dialect in Norway which is that different. There is none which is incomprehensible. But as you say, there are a lot of dialects that are incredibly difficult, and in fact more difficult for us than Swedish would be, than Swedish at least. I just like to call that a little bit. It's not the people from Oslo that learn about dialects. It's all pupils in Norway learn about dialects, precisely because they're so different. But it's just a little bit. I think we had perhaps 4 or 5 lessons, and that was it. Mostly we're learning through exposure. Now, people from Oslo are probably a little bit more hard-headed when it comes to understanding these, because we are used to speaking the standard language, which is what we hear in television most of the time. And so in that respect, it may be harder for us to understand it. But in general, everybody understands all the dialects, but some of them are so difficult that you have to ask them to slow down for
Thanks, Christine, again for clarifying. It's great to have you in the room. Everyone heard okay? Yeah, okay. We have about 3 more minutes to wrap up. So, yeah. Sometimes it still doesn't click. I'm probably B2. I'm not ready yet to take the Bergenstester proficiency exam, and I'm working toward that. And I'm still struggling with the more difficult, more advanced, and more complex parts of the language, and with different dialects that I haven't been exposed to as much, and sometimes with the speed. So I have my own problems with that, because I've done all of these resources here and I need more. And in addition to this, there's at the library, there was one on health. It was supposed to train workers from abroad who enter, maybe they become nurses, for example, in the Norwegian hospitals. And I took that as well. And I can understand all the CDs from that now. So I'm at that level, but there's still, I just keep feeling there's more missing, and I'm really struggling, of course. So maybe it's just more radio, more TV. The best is whenever I get the subtitles in Norwegian, so I hear and read at the same time. Link is something else, and it keeps building up, but it's not strong in Norwegian. It's got lots of Swedish and about 10, 12 other languages, but it doesn't have a lot of Norwegian content. So that comes through with new content from time to time, and I do use that as well, but it's not a main source for Norwegian. And 1 more minute, yes?
I've had many students who took Dialects test, and I myself took the test a long time ago, and I prepared them for this test. What we usually do is that we listen to podcasts in Norwegian, the podcasts that are made for Norwegian native speakers, where they discuss topics like things that happen in society, because that's what you're being tested on in the test. So that might help. At least that's helped me.
That's a very good one as well, podcasts. Because I know one podcast, it's called Skifter. It's the startups. It's about the startup world in Norway. So skifter.no. And if you go there, you can read articles and you can listen to their podcast. They do a series of interviews. Maybe we can get together and talk about other Norwegian podcasts to help people improve at a high level.
Basically, just go to iTunes Norway.
iTunes Norway?
You look at the all the podcasts are made by NRK. And yeah,
So NRK podcast, NRK. Okay. Thank you everybody. Tusen takk.